Today's video is brought to you by Squarespace. So I've been incredibly outspoken in the fact that I believe JJK has one of the more fleshed out yet complicated power systems in all of anime. I believe that Cursed Energy is genuinely one of the only power systems in anime and manga that gives Nen a run for its money. It seems as though any way you can think of to apply Cursed Energy will eventually be done by one sorcerer, whether that be creating an armor that resembles an insect's caprice out of liquid metal, or manipulating the shadows to control Shikigami. If you can think it, you can probably do it with Cursed Energy. And the beauty of Cursed Energy being such a full and robust power system is I can talk about it a lot. More specifically, I can talk about individual techniques that come from Cursed Energy, because even these individual techniques that represent 2, maybe 3% of Cursed Energy as a whole, not only are incredibly complicated, but have rich histories to them. And I don't think there's a better example of that than what we're talking about today: the 10 Shadows technique. See, the 10 Shadows technique is one of the most storied and historic Cursed Energy applications in all of JJK. It's been passed down through the Zenin family for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And Gojo once told Megami that a user of the 10 Shadows technique was able to come up against and kill a user of the Limitless and the Six Eyes. And considering the fact that having the Limitless and the Six Eyes is what makes Gojo the strongest person in the universe, the fact that there was somebody in history who, through the use of the 10 Shadows technique, was able to kill somebody comparable in strength to Gojo is insane. And it speaks to the sheer level of potential that comes along with this technique. But what is the 10 Shadows technique? What are all of the 10 Shadows? How do they differ from each other? What applications are better for different shadows, and why haven't we seen Megami use all of them? Is there an inherent domain expansion that comes along with the usage of the 10 Shadows technique? And maybe more importantly than all of it, what's the history of the 10 Shadows technique? Well, we're gonna answer all those questions and more today, guys, but first, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, hit that noti bell. And if you like the concept of me talking about anime, then you're gonna love my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. But before we get into all that, guys, today we gotta talk about our favorite reoccurring sponsor to the page, Squarespace. Squarespace is your one-stop shopping opportunity to build the website of your dreams. Whether that website be for a brand, a page, or a business, there is no better space than Squarespace. This could be a website selling anime merch, food, or custom stickers. It doesn't matter. There's no better place to get started than Squarespace. But I know what you're saying. You're saying,
Nick, I don't have a degree in website design. I can't just sit down and make the website of my dreams.
but Squarespace makes the building process not only intuitive, but incredibly easy. And building this beautiful website will not only make it easier to engage with your customers or fans, but also sell your product. And one of the tools that makes your life a heck of a whole lot easier are member areas. A tool that allows you to put content or products behind a paywall. And only those who pay for access to those specific areas get access to that content or product, which can create an entirely new revenue stream for people like me. And speaking of things that Squarespace has that help people like me, they also offer one of the most intuitive video content creation tools on the market, which allows you, without even leaving your Squarespace website, to make clickable and engaging videos for your audience. An audience that you can keep track of using the analytical tools that Squarespace provides. And these analytics not only tell you how your business is doing, but how to improve your business, as you're able to find out where site visits or sales are coming from, which can give you insight into where you need to spend your time advertising. And when you're ready to launch that perfect website, go to squarespace.com/WeebCommander for 10% off your website or domain. So what are you guys waiting for? Get out there and build the brand that you know you can. So the 10 Shadows technique, a legendary inherited technique passed down through one of the royal families of Jujutsu, the usage of which allows the user to summon 10 different Shikigami. Now, before we move any further into talking about the 10 Shadows technique, I believe it's important that we clear up what exactly a Shikigami is, because it's a word we're going to be saying a lot. Shikigami are curses. No different from any of the curses any Jujutsu sorcerer has ever exercised, except for the fact that they are summoned and tamed by Shikigami users. The biggest difference between a Shikigami and a regular curse is that a regular curse is created by ambient cursed energy. Negative feelings swirling around a place like a hospital or a place of work will create eventually a curse, while Shikigami are manifested from the cursed energy of one individual. Upon the conjuration of a Shikigami, usually a Shikigami user will use a simple talisman to control their Shikigami. Another big difference between a curse and a Shikigami is that a Shikigami can't exist without the user. The second the technique is released or the user of the Shikigami becomes incapacitated, the Shikigami disappears. This is because the Shikigami is entirely dependent on the cursed energy of the Shikigami user. Now, the application of the 10 Shadows technique is a bit more complicated than the use of a simple Shikigami, and they don't necessarily listen to all the rules. But we'll get into that later. For the moment, let's talk about the 10 Shadows technique. And while there's a lot of places to start when talking about the 10 Shadows technique, let's start this video off in the way that we tend to start these videos off, by answering the easy questions. So how does one become an inheritor of the 10 Shadows technique? Well, children with particular promise in the Jujutsu world, at least amongst the Zenin clan, are selected to be inheritors of the 10 Shadows technique. And upon inheriting the 10 Shadows technique, this user of the 10 Shadows is given 2 divine dogs. And this is the easiest part of being the inheritor of the 10 Shadows technique. These divine dogs are able to be summoned and given orders at basically any stage of training. They're the training wheels of being a Shikigami user, at least in the Zenin clan. But the math's not mathing here. That's not enough shadows to be a 10 Shadows user. And this is because a 10 Shadows technique user only becomes a 10 Shadows technique user after they summon all the other Shikigami to themselves and defeat them in combat, effectively exercising them and gaining control over them. That means that any Shikigami you've ever seen Megami use outside of the 2 divine dogs, he had to summon and defeat. Once the Shikigami are defeated, they can be summoned at any point. All you have to do to summon them is to create a shadow puppet to summon them to your current location. And the shadow being projected by this shadow puppet that you're making with your hands actually acts as the conduit to summoning the Shikigami in the first place. See, while the majority of Shikigami users have to use a talisman to control their Shikigami and to summon their Shikigami, 10 Shadows users are actually able to use their own shadows as the talisman of sorts. As upon casting the shadow with their hands, the shadow becomes liquid cursed energy, essentially. And this liquid cursed energy then takes the shape of the Shikigami. And once the 10 Shadows users has gone through the ritual of exercising 10 shadows, they truly become a 10 Shadows user. Now, technically, the 10 Shadows user doesn't have to be the person to defeat the Shikigami. You can summon a Shikigami to your location with 100 people around you, and you can all beat down on that Shikigami. However, if a 10 Shadows user has any help in defeating that Shikigami, it doesn't come under their control. But this isn't always the worst thing, as a Shikigami summoned into the world through an exorcism rite will attack anything around it, and all those in the presence of the Shikigami exorcism rite are stuck there until the Shikigami is exorcised. Which means so long as you're willing to die, you can summon the strongest Shikigami known to man, and if you kick the bucket, well, at least your enemy's gonna kick the bucket too. And this is a strategy that happens a lot more than you would anticipate. So that is to say that after you've summoned a Shikigami that you don't control, the only way to get rid of it is to exorcise it. However, after you've exorcised the Shikigami in the first place, now whenever you summon a Shikigami, you can get rid of it really whenever you want, which gives 10 Shadows technique users a good amount of flexibility. So long as the user has enough cursed energy, they're able to summon and dispel the Shikigami whenever they want. The only real problem with this is that the summoning of a powerful Shikigami takes a lot of cursed energy. Therefore, if you dispel a powerful Shikigami just to summon it again, that's double the amount of cursed energy. However, should you summon a Shikigami that gets completely destroyed or killed in combat, it can never be summoned again, because you can't summon something that's dead. That would be useless. However, that doesn't mean that the power of the Shikigami is entirely gone. See, if a Shikigami is destroyed or killed, the other Shikigami around it will inherit its power, or at least this is the case for the black and white divine dogs. If either the black or the white divine dog dies, the other surviving dog will inherit the power of the dead dog, which turns the surviving dog into a significantly stronger Shikigami. But since we're talking about the combination of Shikigami power, 10 Shadows technique users can do that as well. And this is without the complete destruction or death of one of your Shikigami. See, Megami has an ability known as the Well's Unknown Abyss. This ability allows Megami to combine Nue and his Toad Shikigami to create Toad Shikigami that can fly. If they find a combination of 2 Shikigami that they find favorable, they can combine them in order to increase their effectiveness. And what's good about this, at least in the case of the flying Toad Shikigami, is that it generates multiple of the Shikigami. And when these smaller flying toads are destroyed, it doesn't destroy either Toad or Nue. So long as Toad and Nue stay alive, he can keep generating more and more of these flying toads. Outside of controlling Shikigami, 10 Shadows technique users also have other abilities, all based around shadows. Most specifically, users are able to move mass in and out of shadows, which allows users to either hide in their own shadows or in the shadows of others. And since they're able to eject themselves out of these shadows, it works as a very effective means of surprise attack. It also allows them to travel in complete stealth, as well as avoid deadly attacks. Let's say, hypothetically, a massive blood arrow is being shot at Megami, and this massive blood arrow was so large there was no way he could dodge to the left or the right or above. Megami can simply pop on into his own shadow and completely avoid the consequences of any offensive attack. And outside of storing himself in his shadow or other people's shadow, Megami and any 10 Shadows user is also able to store stuff in their shadows. Be that a weapon, a book, a new pair of clothes. Whatever you want to store in your own shadow, you can, with the only detractor being that you have to bear the weight of anything stored in your shadow. So it's like a backpack that only you know exists. Also, whose weight you really don't need to worry about, considering the fact that Megami once bore the weight of 2.5 tons in his shadow and was relatively fine. He was a lot better off than I would be. Now, the technical pinnacle usage of the 10 Shadows technique is its domain expansion, Chimera Shadow Garden. However, so far as we've seen, at least from Megami, this domain expansion is incomplete. See, this domain expansion has Megami flooding whatever area he's standing in with shadows. So if Megami's in a cave or a gymnasium, he floods the entire area with shadows. And while for the first time that we see Chimera Shadow Garden, that's just the ground, Megami realizes that if he's in an enclosed space, like a room, he's able to flood his shadows not only onto the floor, but the walls in the ceiling, sealing off the domain expansion. So while technically the domain expansion is still incomplete, so long as he's in a place that can contain all of his shadows, he can pseudo complete it. And Chimera Shadow Garden is tailored directly for 10 Shadows users. And really, nothing else, which makes sense though when you consider the fact that domain expansion is an expansion of your innate domain, and your innate domain is pretty much just your consciousness and will. So it would make sense that the domain expansion of a 10 Shadows user would, make the 10 Shadows technique stronger. But how does this domain expansion strengthen 10 Shadows technique? Well, remember how we talked about having to do the hand signs to create the shadows, to manifest the Shikigami? When you're in Chimera Shadow Garden, that's not the case. See, the reason that the users of the 10 Shadows technique have to do the hand signs in the first place is to give the shadows somewhere to form so they can use their liquid cursed energy to manifest a Shikigami. However, if you have flooded the entirety of the room you are currently sitting in, everywhere is liquid shadow created from cursed energy, which means you don't need the hand signs anymore. It also means that you can manifest Shikigami from any point where your shadow is currently touching, meaning you can now summon as many Shikigami as your little heart desires from anywhere you want. And since technically the reason to use this domain expansion in the first place is because it buffs the usage of 10 Shadows technique 120%, any Shikigami summoned while this domain expansion is out are very easily controlled by the user at a high level of articulation and manipulation that they may not have had otherwise. At the highest level we've ever seen Megami use it, he was also, outside of Shikigami, able to summon clones of himself. 2 clones, exactly. And these clones were also able to use the 10 Shadows technique, being able to pop in and pop out of shadows wherever they want to. However, what Megami didn't have in this best display of his domain expansion that he showed us against Reggie Star was a guaranteed hit. See, Megami's not incredible at barrier techniques, and even though he did fill an entire gymnasium with his shadow, it was still an incomplete domain, which means there isn't an incorporated guaranteed hit function, unlike Dogon's domain expansion, which operates somewhat similarly because he was also a Shikigami user. However, while Horizon of Captivating Skanda does have a guaranteed hit function, and it does allow Dogon to summon fish Shikigami from anywhere in his domain, it doesn't necessarily boost his control or abilities at summoning Shikigami. And quite frankly, even though Horizon of Captivating Skanda does have a guaranteed hit function, it's a lot less scary than Chimera Shadow Garden, because those who get trapped in Chimera Shadow Garden have to fortify the bottom of their feet or any part that hits a shadow with cursed energy, much in the same way that Ninja and Naruto are able to put chakra on their feet or their hands so they can walk or crawl on water. Those standing on Megami's shadows have to reinforce whatever part of their body is touching the shadows with cursed energy, because if you don't reinforce your body, you fall into the shadows. And since the shadows are technically just shadows, if you fall into them, you fall forever. This is because the shadows are formless. They have no mass. They have no gravity. Falling into these shadows is essentially like being shot into space. And everything that falls into the shadows in this domain expansion exists there forever after the domain has closed. So the most terrifying aspect of being caught in this domain expansion is that you have to reinforce every part of your body that comes into contact with the shadows, which might be in all 360 degrees. And if you don't, you get caught in the abyss forever. So all in all, what does Chimera Shadow Garden do? Well, currently as it stands, it's a buff. It makes you 120% better at being a Shikigami user, as well as giving you an opportunity to cast your opponent into never-ending darkness. So not the worst domain expansion, but not the best either. But enough about the rules. Let's talk about the things that everybody's curious about: the Shikigami or the shadows themselves. And while I know this is called the 10 Shadows technique, there's only technically 9 right now. Well, that is if you count the Divine Dogs as 1, which they actually might be 2. So if you count the Divine Dogs as 2, then there is 10 shadows. But considering the fact that one of the Divine Dogs is dead, and therefore it is just 1 Divine Dog now, it is 9. Whatever, I'll leave that up to y'all. But since we're talking about the Divine Dogs, we should talk about the Divine Dogs. Like I've already stated, the Divine Dogs are given, not exercised. The second that an inheritor of the 10 Shadows technique has been deemed, they're given to Divine Dogs. And even though the Shikigami are given, not exercised, does not mean they're not powerful. Both of these Divine Dogs are strong enough that they're able to tear apart curses with their fangs and claws. On top of this, since these are Divine Dogs, they're able to detect curses that are around the user. And the second that these Divine Dogs are able to sniff out a curse, they can notify the user of the 10 Shadows. On top of this, these Divine Dogs are able to track the sense of allies or locations. They basically operate in the way that any standard dog would, except they're invisible to anybody who can't see cursed energy, and if you kill one, the other gets stronger. And with this ability, Divine Dog Totality, the combination of the two hounds, the now black and white Divine Dog was able to do damage to Hanami, a special grade cursed spirit. Now, does this make Divine Dog Totality a special grade Shikigami? No, but considering the fact that the Divine Dogs are just given to you and not exercised, that's a pretty good start. After the Divine Dogs, we have Nue. Nue is a winged Shikigami whose wings are able to generate electrical currents. But Nue's mobility in flight doesn't only apply to Nue, as Nue is so large it's able to pick up Megami and fly him around, increasing his mobility and allowing him to get the drop on people, not keeping their eyes on the sky. Not to mention that the electricity generated from its wings, if it hits somebody, is strong enough to paralyze them, giving Megami and his other Shikigami openings to attack them, making Nue an incredible addition for any combination attacks. And outside of this, Nue is one of the sturdier Shikigami. As it's able to use its wings, they defend Megami from harm. On top of this, we already know that Nue can actually be combined with other Shikigami. Now, whether or not that extends beyond the Toad Shikigami, we're not entirely sure, but we do know at the very least that Megami is able to combine Nue with his Toad Shikigami, which is a perfect segue into our third Shikigami, the Toad Shikigami. See, the Toad Shikigami's entire gambit is the usefulness of its long tongue. Its tongue can ensnare targets by the waist or the ankle or the arm, and the Toad is at such a size that it can slam these opponents that it's ensnared into rocks or trees or buildings. However, this isn't the only use of the Toad's tongue, as the Toad's tongue is incredibly fast, and therefore the Toad's tongue can either be used to move Megami or allies out of the way of incoming harm, as the tongue reaching out and snaring them and pulling them back is faster than they themselves would have been able to move. And this isn't the only way that the Toad can help Megami's allies, or Megami for that matter. Much in the same way that Nue is able to transport Megami around using its claws and massive wings, the Toad is able to store either Megami or his allies in its mouth, which allows the Toad to be able to transport injured allies off the battlefield or just to other areas. We saw Megami do this with Nobara. After the Toad, we have the Great Serpent. This is a giant snake Shikigami that operates in a very similar capacity to the Toad. See, Megami summons this snake from the shadows of his enemies, and as the snake appears behind these enemies, it'll wrap its body around curses or humans in order to immobilize them, which can keep Megami's enemies in place long enough for other Shikigami to swoop in and finish the job. Unfortunately, Sukuna didn't love the Shikigami, so we won't be seeing him anytime soon. Maybe it's the 8 Shadows technique. After the Great Snake, we have the Max Elephant. The Max Elephant is really good for 2 things: water and weight. See, the Max Elephant, upon being summoned, can spew massive amounts of water from its trunk. So if you're fighting the Wicked Witch of the West, or somebody's teetering on an edge and you want to blow them off said edge, then, well, you got that in your bag. But the way that we usually see Max Elephant used is as a crushing force. See, Max Elephant is, well, an elephant. And elephants weigh about 10,000 pounds. So getting one dropped on you is sub-ideal to say the least. However, since the Max Elephant is technically one of the stronger Shikigami in Megami's arsenal, summoning it requires a lot more cursed energy than any of the other Shikigami we've listed thus far. So he tends to only use it in emergency situations or as a finishing move. Now, if Megami's domain had a guaranteed hit function, this would be a much more effective Shikigami. But for the moment, he's kind of just gotta hope that you stand still, which is what the Toad and the Snake are for. However, not all of the shadows are offensive. Some are entirely defensive, like Megami's absolute worst shadow, Rabbit Escape, where Megami summons dozens of rabbits to create a chaos so he can escape. These rabbits don't attack, they don't defend, they're just rabbits, and they just run around. However, the logic behind it is that hundreds of rabbits in a little room is going to be super distracting for the person that Megami is battling against, and therefore he has a chance to run away. Which makes sense if you think about it for all of 0 seconds entirely. Like, obviously the average person sees 100 rabbits running at them and is like,
Oh god, this is the apocalypse.
it finally had enough of the makeup testing. But any Jujutsu sorcerer worth their salt can see that all of these rabbits are incredibly weak. And then you just see a guy running amongst a bunch of rabbits. Like, it's not like they're human-sized rabbits. You're not blending in with them. You're just a dude with a bunch of rabbits at his ankles. But for the chaos that it does create, and maybe the second or two that it gives you to escape from a situation, I guess it is at least somewhat useful. But you only get 10 Shikigami with the 10 Shadows technique, so the fact that he was like, oh yeah, let's get 100 rabbits as one of them is, You know, interesting, especially when you consider the next 3 Shikigami we're gonna cover, because after Rapid Escape, we have Round Deer. So we've never technically seen Megami use Round Deer, and that's as far as I'm gonna get into that. But Round Deer, much like Rapid Escape, is also not an offensive Shikigami. Round Deer is a towering deer that constantly releases a massive amount of positive energy. Now, if you've been paying attention to my page for a while, you'll understand that positive energy in the JJK universe heals. Positive energy is what's used to pull off reverse curse technique, and therefore the Shikigami user who summons Round Deer is constantly being healed, because the positive energy being released by Round Deer is funneled directly into their body. So long as Round Deer is around, they have reverse curse technique working automatically, which is way more powerful than like 100 rabbits. But the abilities of Round Deer don't even stop there. The positive energy released by Round Deer is so powerful that it can nullify some curse techniques. Since regular curse techniques require the usage of negative energy, a massive output of positive energy is able to destroy those techniques, or at least make them harder to use or unstable, meaning that Round Deer not only heals the 10 Shadows user, but also hypothetically stops them from coming under attack from cursed techniques. I think of the tamed Shikigami, it is the strongest, but not strongest offensively, because I believe the strongest tamed offensive Shikigami is Piercing Ox. Piercing Ox is the last of the tamed Shikigami we're going to talk about. Piercing Ox's abilities operate very similar to Juggernaut from the Marvel Universe. It's an Ox Shikigami with an immense ability to charge. However, Piercing Ox can only run in a straight line. But the longer the straight line it's allowed to run in, the more powerful it gets. And it's never explicitly stated that there's a cap on this. That is to say that if Piercing Ox were able to run infinitely, it could generate infinite power. But to make that assumption without being told is a bit of a stretch. Piercing Ox's charging ability is so strong that it was able to go toe-to-toe with the likes of one of the strongest Jujutsu sorcerers from the Heian period. Piercing Ox, without much of a running time, mind you, was able to nullify the charge of and even knock back Yorozu, that, mind you, at this point had used her creation innate technique to cover her body in her liquid metal armor that massively increased her speed, durability, and strength. I mean, Yorozu was top 5, top 6 strongest people in JJK, period. She was considered one of the greatest sorcerers of the Heian period, which is called the Golden Age of Jujutsu. And Piercing Ox was going toe-to-toe with what she believed to be one of her stronger techniques. And like I said, Piercing Ox was fighting in a relatively crowded space, meaning it didn't have nearly as much time to build up momentum as it could have. But unfortunately, even Piercing Ox couldn't deal with Yorozu's strongest attack. Nope, that had to be destroyed by the last Shikigami in the 10 Shadows technique, the one Shikigami who hasn't been exercised by anyone in the Zenin family ever, Maharaga. Or should I say, and I'm gonna have to read it because the name is ridiculous, 8-handled, sword divergent, Scylla divine general, Maharaga. Maharaga is the strongest Shikigami available to the Zenin family, and no one in the thousands of years of Zenin has ever been able to conquer it in one-on-one combat, meaning nobody in the history of the 10 Shadows technique has ever been able to exercise it and use it as a summoning. And there's a reason for that. Maharaga is basically unkillable. See, Maharaga is insanely powerful, insanely fast, has almost limitless cursed energy, and has a sword attached to its left hand. I lied, it's actually its right. And the sword attached to Maharaga's right arm isn't just a regular sword, it's the Sword of Extermination, a blade enveloped entirely in positive energy. And because this blade is enveloped in positive energy, it's particularly effective against cursed spirits, as cursed spirits are made out of negative energy. However, even though technically nobody has ever exercised Maharaga, doesn't mean that nobody can summon it. In fact, Megami believes that Maharaga is his ace in the hole. If Megami is ever in a situation where he believes he'll die, he just summons Maharaga and pulls who's ever about to kill him into the exorcism ritual. And then, even though Megami will die, Maharaga will just go on to kill whoever else is pulled into the exorcism ritual, which means it was a tie. But what makes Maharaga genuinely so terrifying? Well, Maharaga can't be killed using the same technique twice. In fact, Maharaga can't be hit using the same technique twice. See, after Megami summoned Maharaga in a battle he believed he was going to die in, Sukuna flies in to clean things up. And as Maharaga flies in to attack Sukuna with his positive energy blade, he realizes that it does no damage to Sukuna. Realizing this immediately, Maharaga makes an immediate adjustment, and then proceeds to attack Sukuna with cursed energy, which is able to shoot Sukuna through multiple buildings and fly him halfway across the city. However, Maharaga doesn't come out of this exchange unscathed. In fact, Sukuna hits Maharaga with his dismantled dismantle technique, which heavily damages Mahoraga. You know, until of course he heals from it. When Sukuna then tries to use the dismantle technique on Mahoraga once again, he deflects it immediately. It's at this point that Sukuna realizes that Mahoraga, after being hit by something, immediately understands it and can no longer be hit by it. And while Sukuna believed that this might only pertain to dismantle, he also has the thought in the back of his mind that Mahoraga can no longer be hit by any slashing technique of any kind, meaning that anybody who wants to use a slashing technique against Mahoraga not only can't kill him with it, but also can't hit him with it. And it was at this point that Sukuna realized that the only way you can defeat Mahoraga is in one blast with a technique it's never been hit by before. And therefore Sukuna had to attack Mahoraga with a pyrokinetic ability that he'd never used before. And it was then, and only then, that Mahoraga stayed down. However, now if Mahoraga were to hypothetically be summoned once again, he would be immune to Sukuna's pyrokinetic ability. And honestly, making Sukuna have to use his domain expansion to defeat it in the first place isn't even the most impressive thing that Mahoraga has ever done. Because in chapter 218 of the manga, Mahoraga came up into combat against Yorozu. And when Yorozu used her strongest ability, Perfect Sphere, which has her creating a perfect sphere out of the liquid metal she uses for her creation innate technique. And since this is a perfect sphere, which are technically impossible and therefore has no contact points, it generates infinite pressure. In simple layman terms, she generates a black hole. After which she opens her domain expansion, which has a guaranteed hit factor, and throws the perfect sphere at the person trapped in the domain expansion, and then throws that perfect sphere at the person trapped in the domain expansion, which means you now have a guaranteed hit black hole hurtling at your face. Mahoraga simply took his blade of extermination, stabbed it into the black hole, and destroyed it. Yeah, you can understand why no Zenin clan member has ever been able to tame it. And you can probably also now doubly understand why Sukuna is so interested in Megami. And that's it. Basically everything you need to know about the 10 Shadows technique. Now I could have gone into more details and covered some more things that just happened recently in the manga. We're not even getting season 2 of the anime until June. I don't want to spoil it for all my anime only homies. But what do you guys think? Do you think the 10 Shadows technique is the strongest innate technique in all of JJK? Did I miss anything? Tell me in the comments below. While you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. You know, for a final ace in the hole that beckons in my death, Megami wants to pull out Mahoraga a lot.